Right. So we are going to talk about woodland ice damage and some resources to help you take action in your own woodland. And as you are probably well aware, we had a pretty significant ice storm a couple of weeks ago that has caused some severe damage across the state. It's not evenly distributed. Some regions were hit harder than others, but nevertheless, some areas saw some significant damage, and so we thought we would put some resources together in this little presentation to help you kind of get started managing for this ice damage in your own woodland. So, what exactly does woodland ice damage look like? Well, it can look like a lot of things, actually, and it could look like a lot of these things all at once. And so, it's not going to be evenly distributed across our woodland. It might range from some low severity damage, so a few branches here and there, or a bent tree or it could range to actual mortality of the tree, whether it's a stem break or an uprooting of the tree, causing the tree to fall over in the woods. And so, depending on which severity or how severe the damage is, that will really dictate our management for our woodlands, and if whether we decide to try to salvage some of the timber that would otherwise be lost, or we focus on improving the health of the damaged tree to help it recover from this damage. And so you can see a few photos here, some range of severity with the disturbance. You can see up in that upper left-hand corner where we actually have a tree that has fallen over, a rather large tree. And then below that, a more conifer forest where we can see some pretty significant damage with trees that were bent over from a lot of that ice accumulating and just the weight of the ice on the tree, and then you'd introduce wind to that, and you can see a lot of uh, trees that have blown over or fallen over as a result. So we're going to go through a few things to consider in your woodland following an ice storm. And number one is always safety. That is your first concern. And then we'll talk about what trees to cut and what trees to think about leaving and promoting into the future. We'll briefly touch on this IRS deductions from storm damage. And we'll also just briefly touch on wildfire risk, because that is something that we're seeing right now across the Commonwealth. And lastly, just throw up a few resources for you to find some information that you might need when managing for your woodland. And so, safety first. This is always what we promote as the number one priority following an ice storm, because there are so many hazards in the woods following an ice storm. Right, we've got these what we call widow makers. There's these branches or other trees that are hanging up in the canopy, and it might just take a little bit of wind or some movement of that tree, and it could release that. And these branches are incredibly heavy and could do incredible damage, and ultimately could kill you if you're in the woodland. And so we have to take extra precautions. It's a very dangerous time to go into your woodland following an ice storm, and even a while after the ice storm, months or even years after the ice storm, there still could be these widow makers in the canopy. So it's always best to always look up and take a few of these safety tips when going in to manage following an ice storm. And so always wear PPE, personal protective equipment, a hard hat, protective eyewear, if you're going to be doing any sort of work with a chainsaw, wearing the appropriate equipment, so wearing chaps while you are sawing, and appropriate footwear. Stay out of the woods when the wind is blowing. This is a particularly dangerous time, again, with those widowmakers hanging up in the forest that could release down and um, strike you if you're underneath and the wind is blowing. Flag and identify dangerous trees while taking extra precautions around those dangerous trees. Get dangerous trees away from roads and trails in your woodland. Do not cut bent or pinned trees. These are called spring poles. So these are trees that are bent over and they're being held by another object or another tree, just waiting to be released. And there's a lot of tension in that tree. So when you cut it, it releases that tension. It can snap back up and be incredibly dangerous. So be very careful when you're looking at or when you're seeing these bent and pinned trees. And always watch overhead. Again, this is something that I have to reiterate over and over again. Watch out for these hanging snags or these widowmakers in the canopy. And do not fell lodged trees with a chainsaw. Again, this is similar to the bent trees. There's a lot of tension in that tree that's lodged, and that could release on the chainsaw. It could kick your chainsaw back into you, so be particularly careful working out in the woodlands with any sort of chainsaw or other heavy machinery. And we have resources for you to help guide you and help promote safety in the woodlands. And this is found on our website, which I will highlight at the end of this talk. But we have so many great resources, and this is one of them: safety in the woods. This highlights all of those dangers that we just mentioned. And so what should I think about, or what trees should I think about removing following an ice storm, right? Sometimes it's not necessary to remove any trees if we just had kind of a light disturbance. Other times we might have much more catastrophic disturbance and we need to remove a lot of the trees because they're so severely damaged. And so we can talk about exactly what trees might need to be salvaged and what trees could be kept. And that really depends on your woodland, on the species. And so these are unique situations, and it's not easy to relay this information and tell you exactly what to do. But a forester can certainly come out to your woodland, help you assess the damage, the hazards in your woodland, and help guide you along this process. But we're going to go through a couple things that will kind of help give you an idea of what to expect, perhaps what to talk about with the forester. And so we've got these different severity of damage in the ice storm, and we can salvage the timber depending on the severity of those of the ice storm and how the severity on our trees. And so there's 6 main or common things that we see in the woodland. We see main stem breakage, major branch breakage, bent trees, downed trees, greater than 50% crown loss and less than 50% crown loss. And these are all have different implications for management depending on which type of damage you have in your woodland. So a main stem breakage here you can see is kind of snapped on this tree about a third of the way up. Here's a visual or a image to reflect this damage. This tree is obviously not going to grow back or not going to recover from this level of damage. And so depending on if there's merchantable log in where the breakage is, this could be a tree that you would identify as one that might potentially be salvaged in your woodland. Another common damage that we see is a major branch breakage. You can see in this image that a branch is broken off, and in this photo representing that. So depending on the species, this tree might recover. But one problem that we have is we opened up that tree to the potential for introducing rot into the tree, and so eventually this tree is likely going to rot, starting at where that branch had broken off, and we're going to lose value over time, and it's really not going to recuperate or regain the value that it might have at this particular point. And so this is considered a non-acceptable growing stock. And if you're going to salvage for timber, you should think about removing this tree as well. Bent trees, so it really depends on how far bent over the tree is and what tree species we're talking about. We have this general rule of about 60 degrees for a bent tree. And so you can see this tree here is about 90-degree deflection from going up vertical to going horizontal. And so this tree is likely not going to recover, and it's going to lose value over time. If we have just a slight bend in the tree, depending on the species, it'll likely be able to recover over time. Then we have down trees, right? And so obviously here, there's no growing stock potential in this particular tree. And so this tree is obviously going to be removed. The timing is important for this because we have a tree that's on the ground and it's going to start to decompose. And so the sooner we can extract that tree, the more value that tree is going to have as a timber resource. And you can see here this example of a down tree. This tree in this photo is off the ground, so it's not going to probably rot quite as quickly, but nevertheless it will. And this tree presents a particular hazard as well. And this is not a tree that you would want to go in and try and buck up yourself. Then we have trees with severe crown loss. You can see here in this photo, significant damage of the tree. So depending on the species, anywhere from 30 to 50% of crown loss could have detrimental effects on the ability of the tree to regenerate and continue to grow or accumulate growth over time. And then we have a low to moderate crown loss, right? And you can see that represented in this photo. And in this photo, or in this particular tree, it's likely going to recover over time. We still have a majority of the branches that look to be healthy. And so this is a particular tree after storm damage that we would want to probably maintain on the landscape and in your woodland. And so it really depends on the severity of the ice storm and the damage that your particular trees have seen following the ice storm. And again, I can't urge this enough. Safety is always number one, and always talk to a forester if you have questions. They're there to help. They can help assess the severity of the damage and help you make appropriate management decisions. So what can I do if I've lost a significant amount of revenue from my woodland? And so there are tax deductions that you can make if you've had severe timber damage from a storm, fire, ice, tornado, etc. And this really depends on how your property is defined and whether or not a federal emergency was declared. And so there's a whole bunch of details that go along with whether or not you can claim a tax reduction. And so if it's a personal property that is used for your personal enjoyment, that the only way you can claim a tax deduction is um, if it was declared a federal emergency. And right now, Kentucky has requested that the government declare a federal emergency for not just this ice storm, but for the flooding that we have just seen. So we'll have to wait and see whether this is declared a federal emergency and whether your whether you're a landowner for the personal enjoyment of your property, including timber resources, and how you can file tax deductions. And so keep an eye on that and reach out if you have any questions on tax deductions. And then lastly, wildfire risks. And so when we had this ice storm, there's a lot more trees that are bent over, a lot more branches on the ground, a lot more fuel for the wildfire. And then we have a drying event like we've had. There's actually an increased risk of wildfire right now. You introduce chainsaws into the forest that can create a spark for wildfire. And so it's just so important to be extra careful, particularly right now when you're in your woodland following an ice storm and you're trying to manage for that damage, but understanding that there is a risk of wildfire right now. So be extra careful right now. And then we have a website, kytimberdamage.ca.uky.edu. We've got plenty of resources on this website for you, ranging from all the topics that we covered here today. So please reach out and contact us if you have any questions or any concerns about your woodland following ice damage.